The rain started just after 5 that evening. Not the kind of storm that shakes windows, but the slow, steady kind that turns sidewalks into mirrors and makes people pull their collars up around their ears. Downtown Los Angeles, usually buzzing with honking cabs and chattering crowds, softened under the gray drizzle. Neon signs flickered to life a little earlier than usual, their colors bleeding into wet pavement. In the heart of this hush, a man pushed open the heavy glass door of a new restaurant called The Linden. He didn't make a sound when he entered. No dramatic sweep of a coat, no loud greeting. Just a quiet step inside, water dripping from the brim of his baseball cap, his boots leaving 2 faint smudges on the polished floor. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. The place was warm, lit by amber pendant lights that hung low over dark wood tables. Jazz played softly, not the kind you dance to, but the kind that hums in the background like a distant memory. A few couples sat scattered around, speaking in low voices, forks clinking against ceramic plates. The man looked around, not like someone searching for a friend, but like someone taking inventory. He noticed how the hostess barely glanced up from her phone, how the bartender polished the same glass 3 times without looking at it, how the waitstaff moved with practiced ease but without warmth. He didn't seem annoyed, just observant, like a teacher watching students during a pop quiz. He walked to the far corner of the dining room, where a small table sat tucked beside a window fogged with condensation. He chose it not for the view there. Wasn't much to see beyond the blur of passing headlights, but because it was quiet, isolated, the kind of spot someone might pick if they wanted to disappear for an hour or 2. He took off his cap and hung his jacket on the back of the chair. His clothes were simple, a plain black t-shirt, jeans that had seen better days, and scuffed boots. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed, "Look at me." If you passed him on the street, you might not give him a second thought. But if you did look closely, you'd notice the calm in his eyes, the way he held himself. Not stiff, not slouched, just steady. Like he'd seen a lot and carried it without complaint. A young server finally approached, clipboard in hand, eyes already scanning past him toward the next table. "Table for one?" he asked, not unkindly but without real interest. "Yes, please," the man said. His voice was low, calm, with just a hint of gravel, like someone who didn't talk much, but meant what he said when he did. The server nodded, dropped a menu on the table, and said, "Someone will be right over." Then he walked off without waiting for a reply. The man didn't mind. He opened the menu slowly, studying it like it was a map to somewhere unfamiliar. The prices were high: truffle pasta, dry-aged ribeye, cocktails with names like Smoke and Reverie. This wasn't a place for quick bites or tight budgets. It was designed for people who wanted to be seen, or at least to feel like they belonged to a certain world. Yet here he was, sitting quietly in the corner, looking like he'd just come from fixing a motorcycle or walking a dog in the rain. Outside, the rain picked up. A bus hissed past, its windows glowing yellow. Inside, the restaurant filled slowly. A group of well-dressed men laughed loudly near the bar. A woman in a sequined dress adjusted her hair in the reflection of a wine glass. Everyone seemed to fit except him. Not because he didn't belong, but because he didn't try to. He didn't check his phone, didn't fidget, just sat, hands resting on the table, watching the room like a quiet witness. He'd done this before many times in many cities. Walked into places where no one knew who he was, just to see how he'd be treated. Not for ego, not for entertainment, but because he believed the way a place treated its least flashy guests said everything about its soul. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. No one came to take his order. He didn't tap his fingers or sigh. He simply waited, patient as the rain. Finally, a different server appeared, older, sharper, with a crisp white shirt and a silver pin on his lapel that read, "Head Server." His name tag said, Derek. He didn't smile. Didn't greet, just stood at the edge of the table, arms crossed slightly like he was already bracing for an inconvenience. "You still waiting?" Derek asked, voice clipped. "Yes," the man replied. "I haven't been asked what I'd like yet." Derek's eyes flicked over him. The worn boots, the faded t-shirt, the lack of a fancy watch or designer bag. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. A subtle tightening. A silent judgment. "We don't serve your kind here," he said flatly. The words hung in the air like smoke. The man didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just looked up, meeting Derek's eyes with a calm so deep it seemed almost unnatural in that moment. "My kind?" he asked gently, as if genuinely curious. Derek didn't elaborate. He just jerked his chin toward the door. "You know what I mean. This is a high-end establishment. We have standards." A few nearby diners glanced over. One woman stopped mid-bite. The jazz kept playing. The rain kept falling. The man nodded slowly, as if considering the words. Then, without anger, without drama, he stood up. He picked up his jacket, slipped it on, and placed his cap back on his head. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He didn't threaten. He didn't argue. He just said, "I see," and walked toward the exit. As he passed the hostess stand, she finally looked up and did a double take. Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She reached for the phone behind the counter, fingers trembling slightly. Outside, the cool rain kissed his face. He didn't hurry. Just walked down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the misty evening like he'd never been there at all. Back inside. The Linden. Silence settled over the corner table. The untouched menu lay open on the chair, and Derek stood frozen for a long moment, suddenly unsure why his chest felt tight. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just turned away the man who'd helped design the kitchen, who'd insisted on fair wages for every dishwasher and busser, who'd quietly funded the staff's health insurance when the investors said it wasn't cost-effective, and he didn't know that the leather booth he'd just insulted had been chosen by that same man, after 3 visits to the furniture showroom, just to make sure it was comfortable for people who worked long hours and needed a soft place to rest. All Derek saw was a guy in old clothes. All he heard was his own assumption, but assumptions, especially the cruel ones, have a way of circling back, and this one was just beginning its return trip. The man kept walking. The city swallowed him whole, but somewhere behind him, in a restaurant full of expensive wine and quiet shame, the first ripple of change had already begun, quiet, invisible, and unstoppable. The moment the man stepped out into the rain, the air inside the Linden changed. It wasn't something anyone could point to, a dropped fork, a sudden silence, a shift in temperature, but it was there, like the quiet after a thunderclap. Derek stood by the empty corner table, arms still crossed, his face unreadable. He told himself he'd done the right thing. This was a fine dining spot, not a shelter. Standards mattered. Image mattered. Customers paid good money to feel like they were somewhere special, not like they were sharing space with someone who looked like he'd just walked off a construction site. Still, something nagged at him. Maybe it was the way the man had looked at him, not with anger, not with shame, but with a kind of quiet disappointment, like he'd expected better. Or maybe it was the way the hostess kept glancing toward the door, her fingers hovering over the phone like she was waiting for something to happen. Derek shook it off. He straightened his lapel pin, smoothed his shirt, and turned back to his section. "Table 6 needs their wine refilled," he muttered to a passing busser, voice sharp enough to cut through the lingering unease. But the unease didn't leave. It spread. At the bar, the woman in the sequined dress leaned toward her companion. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "He just let him walk out?" Her friend shrugged. Probably for the best. Place is trying to build a reputation, but even as she said it, she glanced toward the empty chair as if expecting the man to reappear, to prove them all wrong. In the kitchen, the sous chef paused mid-chop when a server rushed in, wide-eyed. "You won't believe what just happened out there," the server said, voice low but urgent. Word traveled fast in tight spaces, and within minutes, half the back-of-house staff knew a customer had been asked to leave for not fitting in. One of the dishwashers, a young man who'd been working double shifts to send money home, frowned. "What did he look like?" he asked. "Just regular," the server replied. "Jeans, old jacket, quiet." The dishwasher didn't say anything else, but he remembered his first week in the city, when no one would rent him a room because his shoes were muddy from walking all day. He remembered the way people looked through him like he was made of glass. He kept scrubbing plates, but his movements were slower now, heavier. Back in the dining room, Derek tried to focus. He took orders, poured water, recommended the chef's special with practiced charm. But every time he passed the corner table, his steps faltered. The chair was still pulled out slightly, as if its occupant might return at any second. The untouched menu lay exactly where it had been dropped. No one had cleared it. No one dared. Then just after 7, the front door opened again. Derek's stomach dropped before he even saw who it was. It wasn't the man from before. This time it was a woman in a tailored navy suit, heels clicking sharply against the tile. Her hair was pulled back, her expression unreadable. She walked straight to the hostess stand, said 2 words, "Manager's office," and disappeared down the hall without another glance. The hostess paled. She grabbed the phone, dialed an extension, and whispered, "She's here." Within minutes, the general manager emerged from the back, smoothing his tie, face tight with worry. He hadn't been in the dining room when it happened. He'd been reviewing payroll in his office, unaware that one of his servers had just committed what might be the most expensive social blunder in the restaurant's short history. He found Derek wiping down a table with unnecessary force. "Conference room," now the manager said quietly. Derek's hand stilled. "What's this about?" "Just come." The conference room was small, windowless, lit by a single overhead bulb that buzzed faintly. The woman in the navy suit sat at the head of the table, a manila folder open in front of her. On top of it was a printed photo. It was him, the man from the corner table, the one in the baseball cap. The manager closed the door. Derek stood near the wall, arms at his sides now, suddenly feeling very small. "Do you recognize this person?" the woman asked, sliding the photo toward him. Derek squinted. There was something familiar. The eyes, maybe. The shape of the jaw. But it wasn't until the manager said, "That's Keanu Reeves," that the room seemed to tilt. Derek blinked. "What?" "Keanu Reeves," the woman repeated, her voice calm but firm. "Co-owner of this restaurant. Silent partner, yes, but still on the lease, still on the board, still very much involved in hiring, training, and culture. He visits anonymously every few weeks. Always has, always will." Derek's mouth went dry. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," the woman said. "That's the point. He doesn't wear a name tag. He doesn't announce himself. He comes to see how we treat people who don't look like they belong. And tonight you told him, 'We don't serve your kind here.'" Derek swallowed hard. His mind raced. He thought of all the times he'd heard stories about celebrities walking into places incognito, testing service, watching for kindness. He'd always assumed those were myths, urban legends, not something that would happen to him. He could have said something, Derek muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He didn't have to, the manager said gently. His presence was the test. "And we failed," the woman leaned forward. "This isn't about punishing you. It's about understanding why it happened. Did you think he couldn't afford to be here?" Derek hesitated. "I don't know, he just didn't look like our usual crowd." "And what does our usual crowd look like?" she asked. Derek didn't answer. "That's the problem," she said. "When you decide who belongs based on clothes or shoes or how someone carries themselves, you're not running a restaurant. You're running a gatekeeping operation, and that's not what this place is supposed to be." She closed the folder. "Keanu didn't call me. He never does. But I saw the security feed. I recognized him the second he walked in. And I watched as one of our own turned him away. Not because he caused trouble, not because he was rude, but because he didn't match an image in your head." Derek stared at the floor. Shame burned in his chest, hot and slow. He wasn't a bad person. He prided himself on being professional, efficient, polished. But in that one moment he'd let bias, quiet, unexamined, automatic, take over. And it had cost them more than a customer. It had cost them their integrity. "What happens now?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "For now, you go back out there and finish your shift," the manager said. "But tomorrow we're having a staff meeting. Everyone. Front of house, back of house, dish pit, bar. And we're going to talk about dignity, about assumptions, about what it really means to serve people, not just the ones who look like they can tip well, but everyone who walks through that door." The woman stood. "Keanu won't sue. He won't post about it online. He doesn't do that. But he'll be watching. And if this happens again, on his watch in his house, he'll walk away for good. And when he does, he takes his investment with him." Derek nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't about celebrity. It was about respect. He walked back into the dining room on unsteady legs. The music still played. The candles still flickered. But everything felt different now. The laughter at the bar sounded forced. The clinking of glasses felt hollow. He looked at the guests, not as sources of tips or obstacles to manage, but as people. each with a story, a struggle, a reason for being here tonight. He passed the corner table again. This time he stopped. He picked up the menu, folded it gently, and placed it on the stack by the hostess stand. Then he went to the kitchen and filled a glass with water, not for a customer, but for himself. His hands were shaking. In the back alley, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. A delivery driver lit a cigarette, humming along to the muffled jazz leaking through the kitchen vent. Inside, the dishwasher scrubbed another plate, thinking about the man who'd been turned away. He hoped he was okay. He hoped he found somewhere warmer. And miles away, in a quiet apartment above a bookstore, the man in the leather jacket sat by a window, watching the city lights shimmer through the wet glass. He didn't feel angry. He felt sad. Not for himself, but for the idea that someone could look at another human being and decide they weren't worthy of a seat at the table. He'd built this restaurant with a simple belief. That food, at its best, is an act of generosity. That a meal should be a place of belonging, not exclusion. And tonight that belief had been tested, but he also knew something else. People can change. Places can change. It just takes one honest moment of reckoning to begin. He sipped his tea. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere a saxophone played on a distant radio. And in a restaurant downtown, a server stood a little straighter, looked a little closer, and vowed to do better. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons come not from a lecture, but from a quiet man in a worn jacket who walks in, gets turned away, and leaves behind a truth too heavy to ignore. The next morning, the city woke up damp and gray, the kind of day that makes you want to stay in bed with a warm drink and a good book. But at the Linden, no one was resting. The staff arrived earlier than usual, some even before sunrise, drawn by a quiet tension that had settled over the place like morning fog. Word had spread fast through texts, hushed calls, and late-night group chats. Everyone knew what happened, and everyone knew who the man in the corner had really been. Inside the restaurant, the usual pre-shift bustle felt different. No one joked. No one blasted music from the kitchen speaker. Even the espresso machine seemed to hiss more softly. The busser who'd overheard the whole thing stood by the dish station, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. The bartender wiped down the same spot on the counter again and again. And Derek, well, he hadn't slept at all. He'd sat on his couch all night, replaying the moment in his head like a film stuck on loop. The way the man had looked at him. The calm in his voice. The quiet dignity as he walked out. It haunted him. By 8 a.m., the whole team was gathered in the dining room. Chairs were pulled into a loose circle. Coffee cups sat untouched on tables. The general manager stood near the fireplace, hands clasped, face serious but not angry. The woman in the navy suit, the operations lead from the ownership group, leaned against the bar, arms folded, watching everyone with quiet intensity. No one spoke for a full minute. Then the manager cleared his throat. "We're not here to shame anyone," he began, voice low but clear. "We're here because something happened last night that goes against everything this place was built to be." He paused, looked around, made eye contact with each person. Last night a man walked in here. He didn't flash a credit card. He didn't name drop. He just asked for a table, and he was turned away. Not because he was rude, not because he caused trouble, but because someone decided he didn't fit. A few people glanced at Derek. He kept his eyes on his shoes. That man, the manager continued, was Keanu Reeves. Not just a famous face, but one of the people who believed in this restaurant enough to help make it real. He helped design the staff break room so it wouldn't feel like a closet. He insisted we pay above minimum wage before we even opened. He sat in this very room and said, "If we can't treat every person who walks through that door like they matter, then we don't deserve to be here." Silence. Then, from the back, the dishwasher spoke up. "Did he say anything after?" The manager shook his head. "No, he left quietly. But that's the thing, he didn't have to say anything. His presence was the message." The operations lead stepped forward. "This isn't about one mistake. It's about a pattern. How many times have we looked at someone and made a snap judgment? How many times have we assumed someone couldn't afford the wine list just because their shoes were scuffed? Or that they wouldn't tip well because they didn't talk loud enough?" No one answered, but heads nodded. "This place," she said, "isn't just about food. It's about humanity. And last night we forgot that. Then something unexpected happened." Derek stood up. He didn't look at the manager, didn't look at the ownership rep. He turned to face his coworkers, the people he'd worked beside for months, some for years. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough but steady. "I saw a guy in old clothes and I made a call, fast, thoughtless. I told myself I was protecting the vibe of the place. But really, I was protecting my own ego, my idea of what fine dining should look like. And in doing that, I hurt someone. I disrespected someone who helped build this space. And worse, I made guests feel like they had to look a certain way to belong here." He took a breath. "I don't expect you all to forgive me, but I want to do better. I need to do better." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the bartender nodded. "We've all done it," he said quietly. "Maybe not that extreme. But we've all sized someone up and decided they weren't our kind. Last week, I almost didn't seat that older couple because they looked like they were just browsing. Turned out they'd saved for months to celebrate their anniversary here." The hostess spoke next. "I saw him walk in. I knew something was off when Derek went over. But I didn't say anything. I stayed quiet. And that's on me, too." One by one, people shared, not to excuse what happened, but to admit their own blind spots. The sous chef talked about how he'd once rolled his eyes at a customer who asked too many questions about ingredients, only to learn later they had severe allergies. The busser admitted he'd sometimes ignored guests who didn't make eye contact, assuming they were rude, when really some were just shy or anxious or having a hard day. It wasn't a blame circle. It was a reckoning, honest, human, messy in the best possible way. After an hour, the manager stood again. "Starting today, we change how we operate. Not with rules, but with awareness. From now on, every shift begins with a 2-minute pause. We look at the door and remind ourselves anyone who walks through it deserves respect. Full stop." He pulled out a small notebook. "And we're starting a new tradition. Every week, one team member will share a story about a time they were misjudged or a time they misjudged someone else. Not to shame, to remember." Then the operations lead added, "And Keanu? He'll be back. Not as a test, not as a trap, but as a partner. And when he comes, we'll treat him like any other guest because that's what he wants. But more importantly, we'll treat every guest like they could be him, because in a way they are." The meeting ended not with applause, but with quiet determination. People returned to their stations, but something had shifted. The air felt lighter, clearer, like after a storm passes and the world smells new again. Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush began, a man in a wrinkled suit and muddy shoes walked in. He looked tired, nervous. He hovered near the door like he wasn't sure he should stay. The hostess didn't hesitate. She smiled warmly. "Welcome. Table for one?" He nodded, surprised. "Yes, if that's okay." "Of course it is," she said, leading him to a cozy booth by the window. "Can I get you some water while you look at the menu?" He blinked, then smiled, a real one, small but genuine. "That'd be great. Thank you." From the bar, Derek watched. He didn't intervene, didn't hover, but he made sure the man's water glass was never empty, made sure his server greeted him with kindness, not condescension. And when the man left an hour later, full and smiling, Derek felt something he hadn't in a long time, pride not in himself, but in his team. That evening, as the dinner service began, the dishwasher stayed late to help reset tables. The bartender offered a free espresso to a student who'd been studying in the corner all afternoon. The hostess remembered a regular's favorite wine without being asked. And in the quiet hum of the restaurant, something new took root. Not perfection, but intention. Not performance, but care. No one knew when Keanu would return. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe in a month. Maybe never. But it didn't matter. Because the lesson wasn't about him. It was about them. The way they saw each other. The way they saw strangers, the way they chose every single day. Who deserved kindness, and for the first time in a long time, they were choosing everyone. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual chaos. Honking cars, distant sirens, laughter from a nearby bar. But inside the Linden, there was a different kind of rhythm. Slower, kinder, human. Because sometimes it takes one quiet moment of failure to spark 1,000 small acts of repair. And sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with a shout, but with a simple, honest "I was wrong," and the courage to mean it. 2 days passed. The rain had gone, replaced by a soft California sun that poured through the tall windows of the Linden like liquid gold. Inside, the air felt different, not just cleaner but calmer, like the whole place had taken a deep breath and let it out slowly. Staff moved with more care, not just in how they handled plates or poured wine, but in how they looked at each other, how they listened, how they paused before speaking. No one talked much about what happened, not in a dramatic way, but you could feel it in the small things. The way the hostess now greeted every guest with the same warm good evening, whether they wore a tuxedo or a hoodie. The way the kitchen double-checked allergy notes without rolling their eyes. The way Derek made a point to learn the names of the dishwashers and bussers, not just the servers and bartenders. Then, on the third afternoon, just as the lunch crowd began to thin, the front door opened. He walked in alone. No fanfare, no entourage. Just the same worn leather jacket, the same quiet step, the same baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He paused just inside, scanning the room, not like a celebrity expecting applause, but like someone checking in on a place he cared about. The hostess saw him first. Her breath caught. She didn't gasp or point. She just nodded once and walked over. "Welcome back," she said softly. "Your usual corner table is free if you'd like it." He smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small lift at the corners of his mouth that reached his eyes. "That'd be great. Thank you." As he walked toward the back, a hush moved through the staff, not the kind born of fear but of respect. The bartender stopped polishing glasses. The sous chef peeked through the pass. Derek, who'd been refilling water glasses near the bar, froze for just a second. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked over. He didn't apologize right away. Didn't grovel. He just stood by the table, hands clasped loosely in front of him, and said, "Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" The man looked up. "Water's fine. Thank you." Derek nodded, poured a glass from the pitcher, and set it down gently. Then, after a beat, he said, "I owe you an apology." The man didn't look surprised. He just set his menu down and met Derek's eyes. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but I appreciate you saying it." "No," Derek said, voice low but clear. "I do. I judged you by how you looked. I assumed you didn't belong here. And that wasn't just wrong. It was the opposite of everything this place is supposed to stand for." The man was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bird chirped on the windowsill. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. "Why do you think you did it?" he asked, not accusingly, but like he genuinely wanted to understand. Derek exhaled. "I guess I got caught up in the idea of what this place should be. Fancy clothes, big spenders, perfect manners. I forgot that real hospitality isn't about appearances. It's about making people feel seen, respected, safe." The man nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I'm trying to remember," Derek said. Every day. A small silence settled between them. Then the man gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit for a minute." Derek hesitated. "I shouldn't." "It's okay," the man said gently. "Just for a moment." Derek pulled out the chair and sat. He kept his hands on his knees, posture tense but not defensive. "You know," the man began, "I've been turned away from places before. Not often, but enough to remember. Once I walked into a hotel lobby in New York wearing a beanie and jeans. The concierge asked if I was lost. Another time I tried to buy a coffee in Vancouver and the barista told me they didn't take that kind of payment. I hadn't even pulled out my wallet yet." Derek winced. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for me," the man said. "Be sorry for the idea that someone's worth is tied to how they dress, how they talk, or how much money they flash. That's the real harm." He leaned forward slightly. "I didn't open this place to impress people. I opened it because I believe food can be a kind of kindness, a shared moment. But that only works if everyone feels welcome at the table. Not just the ones who look like they belong." Derek swallowed. "I get that now." "Good," the man said. "Because this isn't about me. It's about the next person who walks in wearing old shoes or tired eyes. Will they feel like they matter?" "That's the question." He paused, then added, "You don't have to be perfect. None of us are. But you do have to try. Every single day." Derek nodded. "I will." The man smiled again, small but real. "Then we're okay." He didn't ask for Derek's job. Didn't demand a public apology. Didn't make him feel small. Instead, he treated him like a person who'd made a mistake and was trying to do better. And in that moment, Derek understood something deeper than shame. He understood grace. After a few more quiet minutes, Derek stood. "I'll let you enjoy your meal. Let me know if you need anything." "Thanks," the man said. "I will." As Derek walked back to the service station, he felt lighter, not because he'd been forgiven, but because he'd been given a chance to grow. And that, he realized, was a gift far rarer than anger or punishment. Over the next hour, the man ate slowly, savoring each bite. He didn't rush, didn't check his phone, just sat, present in the moment, watching the room with quiet attention. He noticed how the new server greeted an elderly couple with genuine warmth, how the bartender remembered a regular's usual order without being asked, how the busser carefully wiped a high chair for a toddler, even though no child was seated yet. When he finished, he paid in cash, exact change, no tip left on the table. Not because he was stingy, but because he knew the staff now shared tips evenly, a policy he'd insisted on from day one. As he stood to leave, the hostess walked over. "Thank you for coming back," she said. He nodded. "Thank you for making it feel like I could." Then he turned to Derek, who'd been hovering near the coat rack. "You're doing good work," he said simply. Derek's throat tightened. "Thank you." The man put on his jacket, adjusted his cap, and stepped out into the afternoon sun. No one followed him. No one took photos. They just watched him go, not as a celebrity, but as someone who'd shown them what real dignity looked like, both in how he carried himself and in how he gave others room to become better. Later that evening, during the pre-dinner huddle, Derek shared what had happened, not for praise, but as a reminder. "He didn't come back to shame me," he told the team. "He came back to see if we'd changed. And he didn't just look at me, he looked at all of us, at how we treated each other, at how we moved through the space. And I think we passed." The dishwasher spoke up. He asked me how my week was. Just like that. "Like I mattered," the bartender added. He remembered my name from last time, even though I barely said 2 words to him. In that moment, they realized something important. Kindness isn't grand gestures. It's consistency. It's showing up day after day and choosing to see people, not as roles, not as wallets, but as humans. And Keanu? He'd shown them that leadership isn't about power. It's about presence. About returning not to punish, but to offer a second chance with quiet eyes and an open heart. That night, as the restaurant filled with laughter and clinking glasses, the staff moved with a new kind of confidence, not arrogance, but the quiet assurance that they were part of something meaningful. A place where mistakes could be mended, where dignity was non-negotiable, where everyone, no matter how they looked or where they came from, deserved a seat at the table. And somewhere out there, walking down a sunlit street with his hands in his pockets, the man in the leather jacket smiled to himself, not because he'd been proven right, but because he'd seen people choose to be better, and that, more than any review or award, was worth coming back for. Weeks passed, then months. The story of what happened at the Linden didn't explode online with dramatic headlines or viral outrage. There were no paparazzi shots, no angry rants, no lawsuits. Instead, it spread the old-fashioned way, through whispers between co-workers, late-night conversations over coffee, and quiet moments shared between strangers who'd been treated with unexpected kindness. It started with the busser. One evening, while taking out the trash, he ran into a friend from his old neighborhood, a guy who'd just lost his job and was too ashamed to go home. The friend hadn't eaten all day. Without thinking, the busser brought him inside the Linden, sat him at a corner table, and ordered him a full meal on his staff tab. When the manager saw, he didn't scold. He just nodded and added a slice of pie to the plate. That friend told his sister. She told her coworker. And slowly, word got around. The Linden wasn't like other places. You didn't have to look rich to be treated well. You just had to be human. Then came the training. Not the stiff corporate kind with binders and quizzes, but real conversations. Every Monday morning before the lunch rush, the team gathered for what they started calling the circle. Someone would share a story about being judged, about making a mistake, about a time someone showed them grace when they didn't deserve it. No one was forced to speak, but almost everyone did. Derek became the unlikely heart of it. He didn't lead with authority, but with honesty. He talked about how he used to think fine dining meant perfection. Crisp linens, flawless service, guests who never spilled wine or asked too many questions. But now he saw it differently. Real elegance, he said one morning. is making someone feel safe enough to be themselves. The kitchen changed too. The sous chef started writing little notes on tickets. Not just allergy, nuts, but celebrating first job, make it special. Or, quiet guest, be gentle. The dishwashers began leaving handwritten thank you cards for regulars who always said goodnight on their way out. And Keanu? He kept coming back. Sometimes once a month, sometimes twice. Always unannounced. Always in the same quiet way. He never asked for special treatment. Never pulled anyone aside for private praise or criticism. He just sat, observed, and occasionally left a small note tucked under his water glass. The new bread is perfect. Or, thank you for seeing people. One rainy evening, about 6 months after the incident, he walked in just before closing. The dining room was nearly empty. Just one couple lingering over dessert and an older man reading a book by the window. Keanu took his usual corner table. No one made a fuss. The new hostess, a young woman who'd started the week after the incident, greeted him with a simple, "Good to see you." The usual, he smiled. "Please." Derek, now the assistant manager, brought over a glass of water and the menu but didn't hover. He knew better now. He waited to be called. As Keanu ate, he watched the team move through their closing routine. The way the bartender carefully wiped down every stool. The way the busser folded napkins with care, not just speed. The way the dishwasher stayed late to help reset the dining room, even though his shift had ended. When Keanu finished, he paid, stood, and walked toward the door. But before he left, he paused near the staff huddle happening by the coat rack. "You've built something special here," he said quietly. No one knew what to say, so they just nodded. He looked at Derek. "You've grown." Derek swallowed. "Because you gave me the chance." Keanu shook his head. "You chose to take it. That was all you." Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the misty night like he always did. No fanfare, no trace. Just a quiet presence that left ripples long after he was gone. A few days later, a local food blogger, who happened to be the sister of the busser's friend, wrote a short post titled, "The Restaurant That Treats Everyone Like Family." She didn't mention Keanu by name. She didn't need to. She wrote about how she'd walked in wearing gym clothes after a long run, expecting to be ignored. Instead, she was seated right away, offered a glass of water without being asked, and served a meal that felt like it was made just for her. The post went modestly viral, not because it was flashy, but because it felt true. People shared it with captions like, "This is the world we need more of," or "Imagine if every place operated like this." Soon, the Linden started getting visitors from all over, not just for the food, but for the feeling. A nurse came after a double shift and cried when the server brought her a warm soup. "On the house, you look like you've earned it." A teenager on his first date nervously fumbled with the wine list, and the bartender just smiled and said, "Water's fine. Love's more important than wine tonight." The restaurant didn't change its menu or raise its prices. It didn't add velvet ropes or VIP sections. It just kept doing what it had learned to do. Treat every person like they mattered, and the staff? They weren't perfect. There were still rushed nights, misunderstandings, moments of stress. But now when someone slipped up, snapped at a guest, made an assumption, they didn't hide it. They owned it, apologized, tried again. That's what real culture looks like. Not a flawless performance, but a daily choice to do better. Years later, long after the story had faded from headlines and social feeds, people still talked about the Linden. Not because a famous person owned it, but because it reminded them of something simple and powerful. That kindness isn't weakness. That dignity isn't earned, it's given. And that the most revolutionary act in a world full of judgment is to look someone in the eye and say, without words, "You belong here." Keanu never gave interviews about it. Never posted about it online. He just kept showing up, sometimes as an owner, sometimes as a guest, always as a quiet believer in people's ability to change. And the staff? They kept showing up too. Not for fame, not for praise, but because they'd learned that the best part of hospitality isn't the food, the wine, or the ambiance. It's the moment you make someone feel seen. On any given night, if you walk into the Linden, you might spot him in the corner, cap low, jacket worn, eating quietly. And if you do, don't stare. Don't whisper. Just know this. He's not there to be admired. He's there to remind us all that the real measure of a place isn't how it treats the powerful, it's how it treats the person no one thinks to notice.